Supervisor Safety Management System Training, Module 3. We'll begin this module by speaking about site-specific training. There will be site-specific training such as the client-required orientation and training programs. This training will be determined by the client and communicated to Bryers Contracting. All company employees will be required to receive this training as dictated by the client. Prior to any employee arriving on site, they must possess a valid and current Construction Safety Training System Certification, or CSTS, or the equivalent Petroleum Safety Training Certification, PSTS. There may be other types of training required based on the contractual requirements of the site. These may include, but are not limited to, H2S Alive, OSA Fall Protection, OSA Elevated Work Platform, OSA Confined Space, OSA Confined Space Entry Watch Person, First Aid Training, Spark Watch Training, Ground Disturbance. Copies of all certifications will be taken at the office. All copies will be placed into the employee file at the head office and in the tracking system. We are also committed to ensuring that our employees are properly equipped to perform their job safely and efficiently using company and client orientations, formal and on-the-job training, and effective communication of health and safety related issues. All Bryers workers must be competent in their areas of job responsibility or must be developing that competency under supervision. This process can last from a week to 6 months depending on the skill set of the individual and the expected tasks to be performed. A competent worker means adequately qualified, suitably trained, and with sufficient experience to safely perform work without supervision or with only a minimal degree of supervision. Tasks must be completed by a worker who is competent to do the work or by a worker who is working under the direct supervision of a worker who is competent to do the work. All workers must be trained in safe work practices and procedures and provided with sufficient experience to become competent at their respective jobs. There have been various competency forms created to document the worker's abilities. These can be found on the Bryers training portal, and supervisors and foremen must complete them for their crews. Observations are the processes through which employees of Bryers can identify, measure, and improve our processes. It can be assumed that any behavior displayed by an individual is initiated by one or more prompts, and if the behavior results in a consequence, it can either encourage or discourage repetition of the exhibited behavior. Bryers Contracting utilizes multiple tools to perform observations. These include, but may not be limited to, the worksite observation. This is a single-page format that assesses elements such as health and safety and environment and general observations. This can be completed at all levels from workers to managers. This is a snapshot for the time, workers, and location being observed. Usually this is employee focused. Site observation or inspection. This method is completed by management and HSE personnel and is used in monitoring and assessing the overall work location, personnel, compliance, and setup. Bryers Contracting believes that the health, safety, and well-being of our employees are paramount. We have identified that several injuries sustained on other construction sites are that of newer or younger workers. Mentor responsibilities. This is a role model and seasoned employee chosen by the superintendent who has demonstrated the appropriate skills and can counsel a new employee in workplace safety. This person is responsible to ensure the new worker is trained properly and is evaluated prior to working on their own. They are responsible to report any issues relating to this program and the development of the new worker to the operational supervisor. The mentor is responsible to ensure all activities issued to the new employee is safe. The mentor must complete a bi-weekly evaluation and report to the operational supervisor at a minimum. High risk consists of those individuals who have no industry experience, minimal work experience in their trade, and overall very limited experience on work sites. Typically only student workers fall into this category. They will follow the program for a long term and require direct supervision for every new task, at least 1 month. This new worker will be identified and supervision must be aware that this worker is new to the industry and requires continuous mentoring until competency can be documented for self-work. These workers will receive one-to-one mentoring and have competency evaluations at least once biweekly by their supervisor or mentor. Moderate risk consists of employees with good general experience, but minimal experience either in the industry or in their specific trade. This group of individuals requires some extra attention to ensure that they fully comprehend the surroundings and job tasks. They will not always require direct supervision, but will require periodic mentoring. The duration of the program for these individuals will be duration of approximately 2 weeks. This duration will vary with the needs of an individual. A minimum of 2 competency evaluations should be completed by the supervisor or mentor before releasing the employee to work on their own. Low risk applies to all other new hires. Supervision are aware that this worker is experienced in the industry but new to the company. Competency will be determined by the site supervisor. 1 competency evaluation should be completed by the supervisor to show due diligence and ensure that the worker is competent in his job requirements. It shall be the responsibility of the supervisor to assess each new worker and ensure that they are signed off once the evaluation is complete and the worker is deemed competent. Bryers Contracting has emergency planning procedures in place that are to be put in place at all project locations. The ERP must contain a map posted in all facilities showing evacuation routes and muster points, first aid kit locations, fire extinguisher locations, and emergency contact information. Bryers Contracting recognizes the importance of not only documenting emergency planning, but the importance of conducting drills and exercises with key personnel that may be involved in an emergency. These drills and exercises will help ensure that the personnel responding to emergencies understand their responsibilities and will help to improve their leadership skills in time of crisis or events. The company will conduct a minimum of 1 emergency response exercise with key personnel no less than once per year at our permanent facilities. When an evacuation alarm or an order to evacuate the site is given, all workers stop what they are doing and shut down and secure the equipment they are using. Proceed in an orderly fashion to the muster point. At the muster point, report to your respective foreman or supervisor. Immediately after arriving, the foreman or fire marshal will conduct a head count to ensure all personnel are present and accounted for. After conducting the head count, the foreman shall report the results to his supervisor or manager. After reporting the head count, all personnel shall remain at the muster point and wait for further instructions if it is safe to do so. Should personnel need to move to another location, this information must be communicated to the fire warden and site supervisor or manager. The worker shall remain out of the emergency area until the all clear has been given. Severe weather can include, but is not limited to, any of the following conditions or a combination thereof: thunder and lightning storms, high winds, heavy winds, extremely cold or hot temperatures, blizzards. These conditions can develop quickly and supervisors must be aware of the weather conditions and be ready to act accordingly. Bryers Contracting will base its lightning policy on the flashbang theory. For every 3 seconds between seeing the lightning and hearing the thunder, the lightning is approximately 1 kilometer away. When the flashbang count is at 30 seconds, supervision will suspend all crane work and elevated work activities. When the flashbang count is at 9 seconds or less, all activities will be suspended and the site will be cleared. All employees will report to their lunch trailer where a head count will be done as per the evacuation protocols and proper notification will be made. All work will remain suspended until the decision to return to work is reached by Bryers Contracting and the client HSE departments. Suggested guideline is to return to work only if 30 minutes minimum has been reached after the last lightning bolt is observed. The success of the fire prevention program will depend on the proper identification of potential fire hazards and remedial actions. Fire inspections will be made part of the regular inspection program conducted by the construction manager and the area safety supervisor. Areas to be inspected shall include general site, housekeeping, the handling and storage of flammable liquids and combustible materials, the handling and storage of compressed gas cylinders, equipment refueling areas, compliance with designated smoking areas, the maintenance of firefighting equipment, and the project fire warning system. Bryers Contracting will assist the media by providing relevant, honest, and prompt answers to questions within the bounds of reason, practicality, and safety. Proper handling of medical inquiries is crucial. Under no circumstances are media personnel permitted into controlled areas. All media inquiries should be handled in a polite and courteous manner and must be directed to senior management only. In the event of a major spill, the following shall be adhered to. Use equipment available to build dikes or trenches to stop contaminants from reaching the water source. Notify the foreman, supervisor, and HSE manager using the SMS incident reporting protocols. Evacuate contaminated soil. Dispose of contaminated soil at an approved disposal facility. Backfill evacuation with approved fill material. Note: small spills may be handled effectively with the use of absorbent pads. All spills, no matter how minor, must be reported using the company and client incident reporting processes. Bryers Contracting shall provide all first aid services, supplies and equipment, and when required, a first aid room. All first aid services, first aid equipment, and supplies shall be in or near the worksite and is ready during all working hours. All first aid supplies and equipment will be maintained by Bryers Contracting in a clean, dry, and working condition. All supplies and equipment shall be stored in a container which shall protect its contents from the environment and which clearly identifies the first aid equipment and supplies. Bryers Contracting shall post in a highly visible place signs which indicate the location of the first aid services and equipment. If signs are not practicable, all workers must be informed of said location. Bryers Contracting shall create and implement an emergency communication system for workers to summon first aid services. A means of communication to summon an ambulance will be available at all times to transport injured workers to the nearest medical facility when necessary. Bryers Contracting shall ensure that the facility is within a distance as to have an ambulance service licensed and readily available when travel conditions are normal. If a licensed ambulance service is not available, then there must be other suitable means of transportation, taking into consideration the distance traveled, the type of injury or illness. It must also have protection against the weather, a way to communicate with the healthcare facility, and be big enough to accommodate a stretcher as well as a person to accommodate them as outlined below. If an employee needs to be accompanied during transportation due to an acute illness or injury, Bryers Contracting shall ensure that the employee is accompanied by a first aider. This is not required if there are 3 or fewer workers at the worksite at the time. Bryers Contracting shall ensure that the number of first aiders, their qualifications, as well as their training complies with the Occupational Health and Safety Code. Bryers Contracting shall ensure that all designated first aiders hold a valid certificate in first aid and have completed all appropriate first aiders training courses. Bryers Contracting will maintain an up-to-date record of who are first aiders. If Bryers Contracting requires a nurse, advanced first aider, or EMT, they will remain at or near the first aid room or be easy to contact in the event first aid services are needed. If a nurse, advanced first aider, or EMT is performing non-first aid related duties, these duties must allow the employee to remain in a clean condition. Records will include the following information: the name of the worker, the name and qualifications of the person giving first aid, a description of the illness or injury, the first aid given to the worker, the date and time of the illness or injury, the date and time the illness or injury was reported, where at the worksite the incident occurred, and the work-related cause of the incident, if any. All injury incidents must be investigated, and first aid-related records will be kept for a minimum of 3 years from the date of the incident was recorded. The treatments listed below are considered first aid regardless of the professional status of the person providing the treatment. Treatments that do not appear in the list below are considered medical treatments. Using non-prescription medication at non-prescription strength. Administering tetanus immunizations. Cleaning, flushing, or soaking wounds on the surface of the skin. Using wound coverings such as bandages, band-aids, gauze pads, using butterfly bandages or steri strips. Using hot or cold therapy. Using any non-rigid means of support such as elastic bandages, wraps, non-rigid back belts, using temporary immobilization devices while transporting an accident victim, drilling of the fingernail or toenail to relieve pressure or draining fluid from a blister, using eye patches, removing foreign bodies from the eye using only irrigation or a cotton swab, removing splinters or foreign material from areas other than the eye by irrigation, tweezers, cotton swabs, or other simple means, using finger guards, using massages, and drinking fluids for relief of heat stress. Illness classification. Any abnormal condition or disorder other than one resulting from an occupational injury caused by exposure to environmental factors associated with employment. Occupational illness may be caused by inhalation, absorption, ingestion of, or direct contact with the hazard, as well as exposure to physical and psychological hazards. It will generally result from prolonged or repeated exposure. Some of the common types of occupational illnesses are listed: skin diseases or disorders, respiratory conditions, poisoning, hearing loss, strains and sprains, other illnesses such as heat stroke, heat stress, frostbite, effects of ionizing radiation. Injury classification. Any injury such as a cut, fracture, sprain, amputation, which results from a work-related activity or from an exposure involving a single incident in the work environment, such as deafness from an explosion, one-time chemical exposure, back disorder from a slip, trip, insect or snake bite. Some examples are cut, puncture, laceration, abrasion, fracture, bruise, contusion, chipped tooth, amputation, insect bite, electrocution, or thermal, chemical, electrical, or radiation burn. Pre-existing condition classification. An injury or illness is a pre-existing condition if it resulted solely from a non-work related event or exposure that occurred outside the work environment. Pre-existing conditions also include any injury or illness that the employee experienced while working for another employer. Pre-existing conditions usually do not affect reportability except when the injury or illness is significantly aggravated by another work-related event. For purposes of reporting, a pre-existing injury or illness has been significantly aggravated when an event or an exposure in the work environment results in any of the following: death, provided that the pre-existing injury or illness would likely not have resulted in death but for the occupational event or exposure. Loss of consciousness, provided that the pre-existing injury or illness would likely not have resulted in loss of consciousness but for the occupational event or exposure. Medical treatment in a case where no medical treatment was needed for the injury or illness before the workplace event or exposure, or a change in medical treatment was necessitated by the workplace event or exposure. One or more days away from work, or days of restricted work, or days of job transfer that otherwise would not have occurred but for the occupational event or exposure. Restricted work, modified duties classification. Restricted work occurs when, as a result of a work-related injury or illness, Bryers contracting or subcontracting company restricts the employee from performing less than 80% of routine functions of his or her job, or from working the next full work day that he or she would have otherwise been scheduled to work, or a physician or other licensed healthcare professional recommends that the employee not perform one or more of the routine functions of his or her job, or not work the next full work day that he or she would have otherwise been scheduled to work. All restricted modified work will be coordinated with head office.